It's exactly 6:30, and I believe we have a quorum, and we also have a very heavy agenda, so I want to get started on time. I am going to be chairing tonight because our esteemed chair, Eric, is on Zoom, and we can see him. And under open meeting law, the chair needs to be physically present, so that's me for the evening. I'm going to ask our clerk, Don, to call the meeting to order and take the roll call.
Suresh Bhatia.
Present.
Peggy Briggs.
Present.
Kathy Quoklow. Eric Dahlberg.
Present.
John Groffalo.
Here.
Pat Geyer.
Here.
Greg Gariello. Don Kupka, I'm here. Lindsay Liss.
Here.
Dee Ortner.
Present.
Carlin Reed.
Here.
Paul Rodriguez. Kwasisa Druzeman. Sri Tupel.
Here.
And Lois Wassoff.
Here.
Okay, we have a quorum.
The first item on our agenda is public comment. Are there any members of the public present? Would any of them like to comment? I'll start in the room first. I see no one. Anthony, are there any hands up online?
There are none.
Okay. Then let's move along to the liaison reports. They're in the packet. They're short this time because we kind of got caught up at our last meeting 2 weeks ago. Does anybody have first any questions about the materials in the written liaison report? I see none in the room. Anthony, any online? Any hands up?
No.
Okay, then let's ask, does anybody have any additional updates that they wanted to share? Pat, go right ahead.
So the schools committee met yesterday. That's why I couldn't report for Eric's deadline on Monday. In the spirit of that meeting, it was downtown. I understand they do that once a year in order to present awards to the Medco ambassadors, and so that was a big part of the meeting. Also, just again to give you an idea of the spirit of the meeting, as you may recall, we're now offering honors sections for the social studies department in the high school. That's a really big change. So we had a big presentation on the social studies department from K all the way to 12 and the type of integration. And of course, the meeting had to also talk about the magnificent opening of the middle school, which got right down to the wire apparently, but got done. So the whole team needed to be commended. There is a finance matter that was raised, and I think it will be raised tonight, so I don't want to take a lot of thunder away from that. But in the assessment, there is, again, I think we all know, a division between the Carlisle and the Concord number of students, and that fluctuates. What's nice is that the schools are really getting these numbers under control, and it looks like it's going to be a little bit heavier than expected on the Concord side of things, which means there's an overage. However, the schools voted to take care of that overage through two venues. One is OPED, and the other is the Technology Fund, which was funded at about $90,000, will get cut in half. So that Technology Fund, as I remind everyone, is a rolling sort of 4 to 5 year attempt to really keep technology fresh in the schools. So it really isn't a magnificent hit there. But as we go into the agenda tonight, you're going to hear a little bit more about that overage and how it's being cared for.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions for Pat about that? Or maybe we'll hold those until we get to the presentation on the school budget. So the next item on our agenda is correspondence. There are several items in our packet, and they include a number of emails on various issues. There's also a recap of the chair's breakfast. Does anybody have any questions or comments about any of the correspondence items? John?
Yeah, particularly on the one from or the many from Miguel, if I say his
Yeah.
name correctly, I feel like we seem to gloss over his emails, which are data rich, whether or not they are factual or not. I think it seems like maybe we should be asking those questions. We ask performance metrics from the school, but we don't seem to ask for any performance metrics from the town. And just this week, town manager said that they have limited options to meet our recommendation. And maybe the select board will say, we can't tolerate this. It has to come from somewhere. And there's a lot of data in here that would say that possibly where more cuts could come from or how we're doing versus other towns. And I just think that maybe we should be discussing this at some point.
Anybody else have any comments about that?
I would just second that, because of the numerous emails that we've received, I think it's only courteous and also in our best interest to review those. And I don't know if there should be a subcommittee that looks at them and reports back, or the whole committee. But I do think that there should be a response.
Don?
Well, I recall when we first received correspondence of this sort, Eric looked at our charge and where's our lane, so to speak. I view this as informative, something we should be reading, but we don't want to step outside of our mandate here and tell the budgeting entities where they should make their cuts.
And I agree with you. However, we did so with the school by demanding performance metrics to say, are you living up to other districts, and is the money that we're suggesting goes to the school being applied appropriately based on how they're doing? So why aren't we then asking just for data and say, how do you stack up against Lincoln, all those other towns, apples to apples?
It's like you teed this up perfectly, because I'm proposing to do that in the FinCom report this year. So, and I'll present some of that later.
Wonderful, because I do think that there's a lot in here that is financially related, when if we're saying the budget, we think the budget should only increase so much, and it goes back to, are we at the right level from which the increases should go off of? Maybe this level that we're at is artificially high for some reason, and that needs to be assessed. I'm not saying who to fire and who to not.
I want to follow up on what Don said, because I very much agree with that. Even with the schools, we did ask the schools to report to us on specific, to give us some comparisons with other districts. And the town, I know, and Kerry or Anthony can correct me if I'm wrong, there was a benchmarking exercise recently, wasn't there? There was a personnel study?
If you're referring to the class and comp, that
Yes.
happened, it was a couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago it started, and it was completed last year.
Yeah, I know that it was completed relatively recently. And did that just have to do with salary levels, or did it have to do with staffing levels?
Normally, when you go through a class and comp, they look at your comp communities and see what they get paid and where we stand, and then determine where we want to be as far as what percentile as far as paying employees. So they do look at other communities, but they're just looking at job for job and what the pay is.
And not at staffing levels?
Correct.
Okay. Even with the schools, when we have pressed them for specifics, we don't tell them where to make the changes. We do press them on specifics. I think the right response to the information that Miguel has been presenting doesn't come from us. I think it comes from the town. We don't function at and nor should we function at a line-by-line kind of a basis. We set overall guidelines. I hear the point you're making, that since our guidelines are based on the assumption there'll be an increase, we should be encouraging look at the base upon which the increase is being keyed, not just the number itself. But I do think that the response to this really needs to come from the town. If we as a committee would like to request the town to provide specific responses, I don't think this is something that we should be forming a subcommittee for, Dee, or spending the Finance Committee's time on. We don't have, that's not our role and that's not our expertise. But we can make requests from the town the way we made requests from the schools. How do people feel about that?
I'm just pulling up the letter. I think we did, right? How do you evaluate your performance, right?
We did it. We asked them a bunch.
Do performance metrics, they don't comp versus other towns. The select board and the town manager don't do that. And so obviously, we don't want to, I know we have a busy schedule, and I want to be cognizant of that. And I'm not arguing to go line by line through this, but when the town manager's on record just 2 days ago saying it's very difficult to make cuts, and maybe the select board says, I don't know, and could say, right, there are no more cuts to be had, and we have data here that says there possibly could be a lot to cut, and we have no way to judge as a committee if 3% off this base makes sense, because we don't have anything to compare it to. And so I think we should make that request on an annual basis, and I would say it's a 0% increase in guidelines until we get information like that. And I'd say the same thing for the schools. If they're not providing the data we want, they should be held to the same standards.
Well, John, would you endorse an approach where we look at a list of AAA-rated towns in Massachusetts and compare our spending increases to theirs, our spending levels to theirs?
I want to know the towns that most represent Concord, so the towns around us that are of similar size, plus or minus, and look at what those budgets are and what the staffing is and how they handle things, so we can know. He brings up very important points. Again, I'm going off his data, so if that's incorrect, I'm not going one way or the other, but he's saying, comparing our town staffing levels to other town staffing levels, and we should have a comparable set and understand what the total budgets are based on our town population, just like we do ask with the school, their spend per pupil, et cetera, so we can say, hey, how are we doing?
Yeah.
And so, do you warrant an increase or not? Should you have to do a gut check and operate more leanly?
Yeah.
We just don't, we're operating in a vacuum, that's all.
Does anybody online have any comments about this? Okay, Don.
We will get into that deeper. The town of Acton looks at those things on an expenditure per capita for the community, and I think that kind of equalizes things. And I've been doing a bit of looking, and our increases are actually lower than the average of our peers. However, our spending that's not subject to guidelines has grown dramatically. And so I think it's important that we begin there and say where actually has the most growth come, and then if we can benchmark ourselves to those other towns that are, as you suggest, that are around us, that are our peers, and then put that data in the FinCom report. I think that would be useful, and it's...
Yeah, and it's not just increase in spending, it's the base, right?
Yes.
Because,
Yes.
so yeah, great, thank you.
I'm going to actually speak to some of that a little later.
Eric has his hand up.
Eric?
Hey, folks, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. First things first, Lois, thanks for covering. I apologize I couldn't be there in person. John, it's a very valid point. Thanks for raising it. Don's right. We are going to start to do some benchmarking against other towns in this year's FinCom report, so that's a start. In the immediate term,
Eric, you
questions to us.
faded out. If you repeat your last half sentence. The connection.
We do want to try to be responsive to any taxpayer who brings concerns to us. And what we had done before, Colin and I had taken a look at the questions we received from Miguel to see what's in our purview and what isn't. Why don't, Colin, if you're up for it, why don't we do that again? Miguel has since sent us several pretty substantial emails. Why don't we go through them and see what would be appropriate for us to respond to, given our mission and our charge, and what it may be appropriate to flag for other parties, such as the select board.
Sure, sounds good, Eric.
Okay,
Okay.
thank
So
you.
we'll take that as an action item?
Great.
Okay. Any more discussion, or can we move on to the next item on the agenda? Okay, so the next item is the
Minutes.
minutes. So I'm going to turn this over to Don and Carlin and let them tee that up.
Okay, so we have one set of minutes for approval. That'd be the minutes of February 13th, our last meeting. The draft is page 40 and 41 of your packet. Were there any comments to the minutes? Any online?
You were great.
Okay, awesome, thank you. Thank you, Carlin.
Thank you, Don and Peggy.
Okay, then let's take a vote on.
Let's first get the motion for approval
Oh, thank you.
as presented.
Yeah.
Can I get a motion to approve the minutes as presented?
So moved.
From Dee. Can I get a second?
Second.
Yeah, from Lois. Thank you. Let's do a roll call vote on the approval of the minutes as presented.
Suresh Bhatia.
I'll abstain, I was not present.
Okay. Peggy Briggs.
Aye.
Kathy Koklow is absent. Eric Dahlberg.
Yes.
John Garofalo.
Yes.
Pat Geyer.
Yes.
Greg Gariallo is absent. Me, Don Kupka, I'm a yes. Lindsay Liss.
Abstain.
Dee Ortner.
Yes.
Carlin Reed.
Aye.
Paul Rodriguez is absent. Quasi Sadruzman is absent. Sri Tupel
Yes.
and Lois Wassoff.
Yes, and again, really excellent minutes.
Excellent.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Good team effort.
A plus.
I've got 9-2 to 0. 9 yes, 2
And 2 abstain.
0 no.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Thank you all very much.
So the next item that we're going to move to is the budget update. So we're running a little early, but I think Minuteman is here. So if you wouldn't mind beginning your presentation now. So if you guys could come to the mics and begin by introducing yourself. I think we all have seen you before, but it would be nice if you could introduce yourselves again.
Is it good? Oh, I guess it's on already. Pleasure to see all of you. My name is Heidi Driscoll. I'm the superintendent of Minuteman Regional.
Hi, I'm Nikki Andrade, the business manager. And the school committee rep, Steve Ledouche, should be here as well.
And before we begin, I just want to make sure that we have time to recognize Steve, even though he's not here yet, for his years of service. He has been an absolutely wonderful school committee member, especially for our finance subcommittee, with his background and just his investment in schools in your towns. He's been absolutely wonderful. So I know his term may be coming up, so I want to make sure that we celebrate him and everything that he's contributed. But now we're going to get all excited about our budget, so any questions before I begin? Okay. So what we are sharing today is our final recommended budget. All right, I'm like, where's that mouse? Perfect. So these few images are just to remind all of us that our budget reflects our values. We support our student achievement in vocational programming and in academics, athletics, extracurricular activities, and of course, our excellent teaching and learning. I don't know why that jumped, but I'll take the hint. So we have a couple highlights about students that we'd love to share with you. So last year, we had 4 Concord graduates. They went on to 2- and 4-year colleges, many continuing study in their career and technical education fields. 2 have apprenticeships, or other plans. We currently total have, oh, I don't know why this is moving on its own. Do you mind
I'm not
backing
touching
that up?
it, but goodness.
I think it's on play instead of on just moving, yeah.
Oh, you're on a timer. Too slow.
That's all right. Well, while we're putting the picture up, it's mostly words anyway. We have 37 current students from Concord, and 18 of our program majors are accessed with those 37 students. And we have 19 program majors, so that's pretty great. We have cooperative education. If you're not familiar with that, that's when students during their vocational week have qualified to go and be employed. And they work under the supervision both of an employer and their vocational teacher and our co-op coordinator, and they are fully working. We have currently 4 students out working, 2 seniors and 2 juniors, and they're in, that's okay, if you just want to hit back, I'll just stay where I am. 2 juniors, 2 seniors, and they're in animal science, plumbing, early education, and engineering. And of course, we want to give a shout out to, we actually had a basketball game tonight, to our Muji Vader, who is an absolute superstar, who's been recognized in the Globe and the Herald. And she has a freshman younger brother who's coming up, making some strides himself in athletics.
Just one question.
Yeah.
The next time, or comment, the next time that you come here, will you bring her?
Oh, absolutely. So you know what's funny? We actually, with Needham, we brought a couple students, but because your agenda's so packed, we didn't do that, but we would love to. That's our favorite thing. She wouldn't have been able to
Yeah,
attend
she's
tonight
competing
because she's literally competing.
She's playing tonight.
Yes, I left I could hear all the noise. It was great. So, let's see. So I think at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Nikki.
So just to get into the finances, we have Concord's preliminary assessment, total just shy of 1.8 million, without the school debt for the school building, approximately 1.3 million. Our operating and capital recommendation total overall, just about 32.5 million, which is a 2.99% increase from the prior year. To break that out further, we have a 5.56% increase in our operating recommendation, and we will highlight the budget priorities in a following slide. Our operating capital recommendation has decreased. Again, we'll describe that, but we had an old energy savings lease from our old building that we were still paying off. So that has since come off the books and it's fully paid. And our building project debt is consistent now. We closed our MSBA project in August of 2024, and we've paid off our final short-term ban. So the building project debt is just our debt service payments. Overall, our member assessments, just about 26.5 million, 2.79% increase from FY25. Oh, goodness. All right. Our big budget priorities and our budget drivers, most importantly, our staff. This will be the last year of our collective bargaining agreement that we have, and we'll be negotiating next year, but we have a 3% plus any of the steps and levels for the teachers. We really took a look at the supplies and materials in particular, because our vocational programs, use industry supplies, and there's been, as everyone knows, significant inflation. So we really took a look to make sure that those students could continue on with all the hands-on learning that they need. Our insurances was something that had increased for our building and our general liability insurance due to some claims. However, we were able to level fund our health insurance. We have a new transportation bid that we received in January. That was approximately 5% increase, but we are seeing more significant need for special education transportation, homeless transportation, and foster care transportation. So this year, we've kind of really focused on, properly budgeting for that instead of going to the school committee to ask for budget transfers. We are able to allocate those to grants as we have them available, but there still is a significant increase we've seen. And one of the big drivers for the operating budget going up is the OPEB. So we had a Minuteman study committee put together December 2021, which Mr. Ledoux was part of. We had planned, because the ESCO lease was falling off the books, that would be the appropriate time for all of our towns and, to be fiscally responsible for our member towns to, while that's coming off the books, add our $300,000 increase to their contribution. There's additional information on OPEB in future slides. We also have some other capital stabilization contributions, as well as other capital needs for the building. And as we have continued to promise, we will be offsetting the athletic field debt with our facility rental revolving account. So just a reminder for all of our towns. Part of our budget is a $950,000 increase, $950,000 contribution to our capital stabilization fund. It's a $100,000 increase from last year's contribution. We did have a long-term capital plan that we are in the process of looking at and vetting with our capital planning subcommittee, as well as our finance committee, to plan for the future and what that's going to look like for Minuteman. So from that report, we did pull some things that are some needs for this year, which are about $153,000 for our school. Just a little more detail on OPEB, which everyone loves to chat about. Our OPEB trust balance is just about 1.7 million. Our unfunded liability, 22 million. So as we mentioned, we do have the additional $300,000 contribution this year. So our budget line, 1,155,000, that's broken out to be a $605,000 contribution to the fund and a $550,000 contribution to our active retiree health insurance. This will be our new base, and each year will increase 5%. Just a little bit now on the enrollment of the school. As you'll see in the blue line, we have 669 students. Our red line is our member town students, so you can see the shift in the graph. We have a majority of our member town students now at the school, and our non-member town students is slowly declining. We actually had the same number of seniors out of district graduate that we had freshmen come in. So you'll see in this slide, we do have a breakout by town, and we did have 19 freshmen come in the incoming class that were non-member towns. But for Concord, you'll see 38 total students. Did want to highlight your senior class this year, you only have 6 students. So as of, I guess today, you have a slot allocation of 16, and there were 15 Concord applicants. So I would anticipate that you would have a bit more of a bump for one more year as far as your 4-year rolling average goes, because you'll have 6 seniors graduating, and depending on acceptances based on the applications, we do see it being higher than what you're graduating out. We've continued to talk about our out-of-district tuition revenue decreasing and our capital fees decreasing as those out-of-district students slowly graduate out of the school. So we'll continue to kind of track and look. This year, we had the same number of seniors graduate as freshmen came in, so it was more level this year.
But I can tell you, as of right now, we have over 200 in-district applicants, so it is not looking like we would have anyone from outside of our region.
Mm-hmm.
So, man.
Thank you.
So this slide just shows our preliminary assessments and in comparison to our 4-year rolling average. Concord, we have a 2.28% increase from FY25, and the 4-year rolling average has increased 9.6%. You typically see those correlate very strongly. Our operating budget is tied to that. They don't align all of the time because our capital budget is broken out a bit differently. It's 50% based on the 4-year rolling average. 1% is divided out by each of our 9-member towns, so that's an additional 9%. And then the remaining 41% is based on DESI's combined yield effort. So that's the community's ability to pay for education based on property values and household income. And then that's multiplied by the percentage of students that are enrolled in Minuteman compared to the students overall. So, but overall here, 2.28% for Concord. And this just shows the historical assessments. As I mentioned before, they sometimes are very strongly correlated. This year, Concord's assessment is a bit less than the 4-year rolling average. And just wrapping up our budget, this shows the comparison of the numbers year by year, but overall 2.99% operating and capital budget. Our Chapter 70 and Chapter 71 aid was updated based on the governor's budget that was released January 22nd. Our prior year tuition and capital fee, again, had remained consistent based on those 37 non-member students. Our facility rental revolving account continues to offset that athletic field debt, and will continue to offset with our excess and deficiency fund $650,000 for our member towns, totaling 2.79%. And this is the assessment components as required in our budget. And we are happy to answer any questions that you have.
Nikki, could you tell me again how many slots are going to be available for the next year for incoming students from Concord? Are there, how does that work out? What were the numbers again? I didn't catch that.
It was 16 slot allocation, and there was 15 applicants. So all of the applicants from Concord would be offered a spot based on your, based on the slot allocation that is.
And what do you do with the empty slot?
So it's then.
I can answer that.
Sure.
So with empty slots, they're never empty. They end up getting filled with people who have, or students who have applied from other districts that are over their allocation.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just a related question on that. Are the non-member folks only admitted if the members don't have any, don't need any other slots? Okay.
Exactly.
Okay.
So last year, we did accept every single member student from all of our sending towns.
Okay.
And additionally, we took, is it 17?
19.
Okay.
19 more.
So that, you just don't know year to year, okay.
Yeah.
We don't know, we also, just because we accept a student doesn't mean they accept us. So that is, it's a.
Oh, right.
Right, it's a bit of a waiting game. Our acceptances are going out shortly. And typically, anywhere from 30 to 60 students, not Concord overall, decline the acceptance, which puts us, for planning purposes, I'm sure you hear from your other schools as well. It's a big task to prepare for that.
Got it.
Interesting.
Don?
Yeah, Nikki and Heidi, thank you. That was a wonderful presentation. My question is about the non-assessment revenue, about 4.1 million from Chapter 70, Chapter 71. Do you know if we've ever not gotten that money during a recession or some other issue where the state has to cut its budget?
I've only been the business manager since 2020, and I maybe would refer
I
back
can
to
state from
Steve.
my experience.
Yeah.
1 year before you.
I've never experienced
Never
where
had
the
that problem.
governor's budget was cut shorter than. Have you?
I have not, and I would have been in a position where I would have been traumatized by the effects of it, no matter my position,
Yeah.
even if it weren't superintendent.
Yeah.
But I have heard of grants being clawed back. So if that would be, if there is a worry,
Yep.
is the clawback.
Right.
Currently, that's not happening, but is that always a possibility? It is.
You know, you've guessed where my question came
I-
from.
I
so,
know where
yeah,
you're
yeah.
going, yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
okay. So would you think you would probably come back to the towns if that were to happen, hypothetically?
I don't
Yeah.
think we could predict that. I
Yeah,
think
okay.
we would see a hit with our grants
Yeah,
first,
yeah.
and then we would be able to have some planning, because it wouldn't just affect us, it would affect the whole state.
Yes.
So I hope the state would have a plan for what to do with its educational system.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm going to go to, oh, Lindsay, go ahead. No, if you have a question, then I'll go to the.
Just wondering if you could have any perspective on future assessments. I know our assessment will likely increase because our number of slots open for next year is going to increase or moderately increase. But just in general, if all else equal, do you have any kind of perspective on the 3 to 5 year time frame as to where we should expect our assessment to go?
So I don't think we can predict until we know the number of students. That's why.
Well, I
we
guess on
don't-
a per student basis,
So-
maybe. Like, so assuming all else equal.
What we did last year was we did put a 3-year projection together, once we had a good sense of the income of freshmen for this year. And again, it's very relative, and estimates, could be very different. But we had estimated for Concord's incoming class that it would have been 12 based on last year's freshman class. This year's was 10. So we did, estimate Concord's assessment this year, or the operating budget, to be about 4%, and the assessments to the towns to be, around 2.5. So I'd say we did kind of track it overall pretty well. But again, it really depends. Our budget is so strongly based on the 4-year rolling average that it's hard to tell a community, oh, we think it's going to be this, because if your enrollment ends up being so much higher, your assessment is also correspondingly going to increase. So it's tough when you try to predict out, not just 1 year, but 2 and 3 years. You don't really know which students are going to apply for Minuteman's education.
And the 3-year projection is because we know who the sophomores, juniors, seniors will be.
Yeah, but nothing kind of underlying that would drive the general cost of delivering your education upward?
Oh, I see what your question is.
Yeah.
So steel, wood,
Okay.
okay? Those, we did account for that in our budget, much like the concern with the clawback.
Yeah.
We are supply heavy, industry supply heavy. We did, at the advice of the finance committee, actually increase our allocation to supplies to make sure we're safe and would not have to come back to the towns for that. Good question.
Okay, you had Pat and Peggy and Dee.
So let's, Dee, why don't you hold for a second?
Sure.
Peggy, did you have a question? Were there any hands up in the remote group? I guess,
You could see it, right?
Suresh, did you want to say something? Okay, then Dee, go right ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions for you. And they're not necessarily dollar-related. What are your top 2 programs in terms of number of students who are entered into those programs?
So in order to save the feelings of all of our 19 wonderful programs, I won't call them our top 2 programs, but I will say that our programs with the most interest this year, electrical was by far. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, because I didn't bring that with me, I think an additional trade was second. I think plumbing was the second most popular.
Okay. Where is your animal science program fitting in at this moment?
Physically, the building, or
Well,
what
the
do you?
building they were going to be in a different building. right?
Yes.
Yeah, and they're in this other building now. That's correct, okay. So how many students take animal husbandry classes?
So I don't have that number in front of me, but I did visit the program. We look full. We don't have empty seats. We have our first graduating class with animal science this year.
Okay.
And it is flourishing through the other grade levels. They go to animal hospitals, to their clinics. I think they're doing great. We just opened a a doggy daycare that is open to the public on particular days. We're not open every day, but it's imitating our early childhood center. I think opening that program was wonderful and a benefit to all of our students.
So my follow-up question on that is, what percent of the students who are graduating in that program are male versus female?
Oh, I definitely wouldn't have that offhand, but our actual population at Minuteman, most vocational schools are a little bit over, are like 60-40 on the female side. Our
60 on the female side?
mostly female, like the other vocational district I've worked in, actually are more heavily female. We are not right now. Minuteman itself is actually more heavily male.
Okay, I was just kind of
Yeah.
curious, how many guys are in the animal husbandry?
Yeah, there are at least a couple, because I watched their presentation.
Dee, I want to keep us on
Okay.
schedule, so,
I have one other question.
Okay.
Your transportation, you said the transportation costs have increased. Do you have any numbers? Do you have any percents?
It increased by 5%.
5%?
Which was an incredible relief, because I'm sure you've heard from other districts that those percentages, because very few bids come in, have been, some districts have seen 20 and 30% increases, which is, we were bracing ourselves for, and that's not what panned out.
And how far do you have to travel?
It is a gigantic span. I don't know the exact number, but I think, I would have loved to have brought the map. I can bring that at our next meeting.
Yeah, we have,
Close to 25 miles.
Lancaster, Bolton, and Stowe are definitely geographically
Okay.
would stretch us, whereas, our other member towns are a bit closer to the school.
We have some students who are on a bus for an hour to get to our school every day.
And they love it, though.
And they love it. They love it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
thank. If there are no other, Eric has his hand up. Eric, do you have a question? Eric, did you take your hand down because you don't have a question? Okay, not hearing from Eric, I think I'm going to thank you guys for a terrific presentation. It's always fun to see what Minuteman is doing. It's always impressive to see what you're able to accomplish. So, thank you.
Well, thank you for having us, and I would like to, you missed this, but I would like to re-acknowledge Steve Ledoux for his contributions to me. I gave a much longer speech earlier.
She said very nice things about you. It's all on tape, Steve.
Yeah.
Play it back.
I'll watch it on TV.
Watch it on.
Just want to let everybody know that my term is up in June and I'll be stepping down. So if you know anybody who's interested in being a Minuteman rep, you should fill out the paperwork.
Well, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nikki.
Nice to see all of you.
So we're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the town update. So, Anthony, you're up to provide an update on your presentation from the last meeting. And we understand that the select board is not going to hear and vote on the town budget until later in March, right?
March 24th.
March 24th. Yeah.
Let me just blow this up. All right, so nothing has really changed on the town side. We're still within guidelines. I will say, if you look at the section right here for general government, the one that's highlighted yellow right here. So we will have some additional movement within government segments, but overall, we're still going to be meeting guidelines. So it's just more a little bit housekeeping. An example would be facilities right now is under general government. We want to put that where it truly lives, which is what public works. So just things like that, but it'll still meet the guidelines, so that's important. Plus, plugged in some other numbers, the group insurance, at the increase at the 14.84%. So, that might go up just to here, because I believe I put 14.8, and the assessment that came in was actually 14.84. So, minor, small little change there. Other than that, I still want to go over debt service. That's one thing that I want to double check on that. But I got to change some assessments for Minuteman and the region based on some information that we had, so, which I think that it'll be going down slightly, or Minuteman might be.
I think Minuteman
done
was the
that.
same.
I think it's that, okay, yeah, so I think CPS just, CCRS did. But overall, I know that there was concern that, we were gonna need an override this year. We're not. So I think the important thing that I wanted to share is down here in the bottom. So, after we went through the budget and we added in the cost for the OPEB and the overlay, and the projected unused levy capacity was at 2.187 million. So now we have to add back in what we're gonna be using from the middle school stabilization to reduce the excluded debt. That was the purpose of creating that, so that's gonna be $1 million. We're gonna close out the parking meter revenue, and we're gonna use that to offset the capital costs, so that's $325,000. Another thing that I'm gonna propose this year is, you heard me last year and say using free cash to offset the tax levy is bad practice. Using free cash to help fund a capital plan is not bad practice. So, what I'm gonna propose is that we use $1 million to support the capital plan. So between that and the, if you remember, we actually exceeded the 3% threshold just ever so slightly, but we also decreased our tier 2 borrowings, and that was by design. We wanted to cut down on borrowing within the levy, which, providing that the road project passes, we'd be looking at borrowing about $2 million as opposed to $5 million. So I think that's going in the right direction. So with that, after all said and done, those get added back in to what the projected unused levy capacity. So I'm projecting that we'll actually end up with about $4.5 million.
What does that equal as a percentage?
I
Anthony,
was
roughly?
just thinking of that. It's probably
3 point
three and change.
Like 3.6.
Was that what it was? 3.35.
3.35?
So I'm, happy to answer any questions as it's starting to shape, come into form.
Carlin first, and then Lindsay, then Dom.
I'm going to do 2 questions. First off, the $1 million added from the middle school stabilization fund, can you give me the total amount of this that's in the middle school stabilization fund now, and why you think $1 million this year is appropriate as opposed to all of it or more than $1 million this year? What schedule do you have in mind?
So I can tell you, it's around $5 million. I don't have the exact dollar amount, but it's around 5, a little bit over 5 with the additional interest that we'll have this year. My understanding that the plan was, and Carrie, correct me if I'm wrong, but when this was created, it was to really offset the period of time before some of the earlier school debt falls off.
Exactly.
So, and that's in 4 years or 5 years? I think it's 4. 28. All right, so let's call it 4 years for the sake of so if we, so just taking the million, I guess the plan was 750,000 for each year, but we upped it to $1 million because if it's fallen off in 4 years, you say, then,
Wouldn't that be 1.25? If you're dividing 5 million by 4 years?
Yeah, but remember, we have one little borrowing left, so maybe we want to increase
Okay,
that next
okay.
year once we
Got it.
close
So
out the
that's-
project. So at some point, yeah, you're right. It's more than $1 million in 1 year.
And that's my recollection too, is that when you looked at the chart, of what the borrowing was going to look like, there was a hill.
Yeah.
When the middle school borrowing, the beginning of the middle school borrowing coincided with the tail end of the other school borrowing.
Yeah, we should see that
So
chart.
the idea, it's, we can get hold of that. That was something that FinCom looked at a lot when we were discussing the middle school stabilization and when we were determining how much money to put in middle school stabilization. So it exists in the archives, but I'm sure we can,
We should resurrect it so that we know why we're doing 1 million now instead of something else.
I think that's a good point. Yeah, we should. So why don't we take that
Yeah,
as a
and I'm still
follow-up
gonna
item?
look at that and just analyze that a little closely. I might be coming and saying, let's do 1.25. I don't know yet, but at the very least, it was gonna be 750. I bumped it up to the million, and still a little bit more work needs to be done with debt service, so,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm going to hold my second question till everybody else has a chance.
Okay, so then Lindsay, you were next.
My question is about free cash. Do you have a sense of where free cash is going to be coming in? And if this is risky at all, putting $1 million towards capital here?
No, I don't. So we had hoped to have a free cash estimate by tonight's meeting, but unfortunately, we don't. And I know last year we ended with $9.5 million. We really didn't use all that much at last town meeting because we didn't use the $1 million. So I don't even want to guess, but if I had to guess, it'd be in excess of 9.5. So, no, $1 million is not. And actually, when we get into, start talking about other potential warrant articles, I'd be looking to use a little bit more free cash to start funding some stabilization funds too. So,
Got it.
and still leaving in there, roughly say 5% within free cash.
So so the 9, if you think we're going to come around 9 or 10 million, what percent is that?
I don't know.
Is it over 5%?
Oh, it's over 5%, yeah. Yeah, it's probably
It's a percent of what?
9%. It's percent of the prior year
Total.
budget.
Total budget. Oh, for the prior year. Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, then that's very strong.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's very strong, it is.
thank you.
Don, you had a question?
Anthony, I remember that there was a missing figure in our last meeting, line 13A or something like that, and I was looking to this one and I couldn't find what that was.
I think it was a retirement assessment for the
Okay.
town. So that was the 4.533436?
Okay, so that's pretty much unchanged. Well, I think I really like this format. We can see the summary of the budget, and I just want to point out for the committee here that that sort of second block called town government, that's kind of that's the guideline spending, and this year the increase is about $930,000, and then the schools are down below, but the joint accounts in the middle are not subject to guidelines, and they're going up by $3.5 million. And I think that's kind of a first place we need to look for where the money's going. And just further comment to your point about looking at the stabilization, we may. Anthony shared with me for the Finance Committee report the full schedule of our debt, and I can see that we have a big jump next year in debt service, $2 million jump practically. This year is high and 27 is high, and then it's down. So we may want to actually come up with a plan to use that $5 million in 3 years over 25, 26, 27. I think if we look at against those obligations, it'll help.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions in the room for
I have
Anthony?
another one, but Eric is online, so I can go after him.
Eric, would you like to ask a question?
I think he's getting.
Eric, we can't hear you if you're speaking.
Oh, maybe he's texting us, maybe he. Oh, can I unmute him?
Yes, please unmute the
You're
chair.
actually unmuted in here, Eric. I just muted you, and now I'll ask you to unmute.
Eric, do you want to text me and I will read your question?
Okay. Can I fill in while we're waiting for him, or do you have him?
Why
Let me
don't
just
you,
see
why don't you go ahead, Carlin, and we'll try and deal with
Okay.
That doesn't-
with whatever technical issue we have with Eric.
Oh, he texted me, can you ask Anthony to unmute me? I guess,
Yeah.
He's unmuted.
Oh,
you are unmuted,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's unmuted.
You're
The
unmuted.
only
Maybe he's
option
not
is-
hearing
he's
us
taking it
either.
personally. You know, he feels like it's a punishment for the missing one
See
meeting.
what happens, Eric, when you're not here?
You gotta be here. If
You
you're
gotta
not
be here,
here,
that's it.
stuff happens.
All right,
Does
while
he
we're,
wanna, does he want to call somebody when you ask the question?
he's going to text him, text him.
He's texting something now.
Okay.
Carlin, go ahead.
This will be quick. The calculation of free cash, by my calculation, based on your numbers, Anthony, your total expense is $140 million. 5% of that is $7 million. Not $5 million, but $7 million. That's 5%. So if we're looking at 9.5, that's just, we've got 2.5 million above the 5% level. Okay. The other question that I have is about the total local receipts. I'm still looking for a breakdown of how that changes from the previous years, because I'd like to see how what your assumptions are. And I think if you look at what happened, what we've posted in the fiscal year '24 budget book, it gives the 3-page breakdown of what that is. I'd like to see that at some point, because that shows us what the assumptions are for the underlying point. That was it.
Eric's question is, he'd like to understand why the budget presentation to the select board was pushed to March 24th. It seems to us that this is substantially completed, and we've got a public hearing coming up on the budget slated for early April, so it doesn't give us a whole lot of time to deal with whatever comes out of that select board meeting. So that is Eric's question.
You know, as much as it looks complete, we're still doing some internal shuffling, and, you know, we as even yesterday, Carrie and I were sitting down going through where some of the cuts, especially with staffing, is going to come from. So, you know, it takes a little bit of extra time to go through the procedure when we're talking a reduction of staff. So, you know, I would just say it's a lot for us this year. I don't know, Carrie, if there's anything other than that, but that's, it's just still. Should be on.
Yeah, okay. So the proposal that we have right now, it does meet guideline. We have, when we went through, we asked departments to submit a level service budget, and then we had to go through, because level service doesn't always translate the same to every department. So we went through and we made sure that the submissions were level service. And we found we had about $600,000 over what the guideline was. So we had to go through and propose a series of reductions, and we did present that to the select board on February 10th, and those were our preliminary reductions, and they included a net reduction of 2.5 FTE. The overall reduction from 26 recommended to from 25 to 26 was 4.7, but we had some departments submitted a reduction of 2.2 FTEs, because there were a few positions that were open that we wanted to reevaluate. So I'm backing those out, but we were down 2.5 positions. So I think we just wanted a little more time. Obviously, we talked about reductions in overtime at the fire department, which will result in a changing of how they staff their shifts. And we presented a reduction in the library, which results in the closures on Sundays. Obviously, neither one of those is great. So we are looking through to see if we can come up with some alternatives to that. But we have a budget that meets guidelines, and it's not ever going to come in higher than guidelines. So I guess I wasn't necessarily thinking that we were going to be coming back to the Finance Committee. We're certainly happy to come back to talk about what the final budget looks like, but it's going to meet the guideline.
Okay. I don't know if Eric is still on. He may have dropped off to deal with this technical issue, but thank you for that. Pat, did you have a question?
Nope.
No? Good. Any other questions, either online or in the room? Okay.
I'm gonna try to promote Eric again, see if, I think he may have logged out and back in.
Looks like he's logged in.
Yeah, he looks like he's back in.
Yeah.
There.
We are up
Folks,
to...
can you hear me?
Yep, we hear you now.
Oh, good, Eric.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for all the technical issues. I'm on, and thank you for that response, Anthony and Kerry.
So that brings us to the next item, and it's timely that you're back, because the next item is the CCRSD update. I know that you heard Pat's update based on the school committee meeting, and I know that you've also gotten information from the, from CCRSD directly, and you were going to report on that? So I will ask you to do that.
Yes, thank you. So I had put the region's budget back on the agenda. Recall they gave us an update at our previous meeting on February 13th, and we ran through it quickly. We were short on time, so we didn't get all the way through it. And what we didn't get to was the end, where they showed that their budget was coming in slightly over our guideline dollar amount, and that was due to the enrollment shift between Concord and Carlisle. So I asked if they could come back tonight and walk us through that. I wanted to make sure everybody on the FinCom saw that and was aware that that's the direction we were headed in. In the interim, as Pat shared in her liaison update, they met last night and they revised their budget to come within guideline. I can't see the room. Is somebody from school leadership present?
No.
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 No, there's no one from the school
Okay.
leadership here.
Online, I don't know, or on the webinar, no.
It was a long meeting last night.
Okay. Well, thank you, Pat, for the update, and I think you covered it. I mean, their latest numbers showed that they were coming in over $90,000 over our guideline amount on account of this enrollment shift issue. So what they voted to do last night was revise their budgets, that they're now coming in at guideline, which is great news for the taxpayers. It's great news for our process, and it's, I mean, in my view, a nice shot in the arm for the budget process this year. So it's a good news story. I regret they're not here to walk us through it themselves, just because they had a bit more detail.
Pat, did you have something you wanted to add?
So, yes, so Eric and FinCom, if you look on page 85 of our 122-page document, you will see that they had proposed, as Eric had said, these ways of getting around the $95,000 overage. That was indeed what was voted by the school committee. So $50,000 out of OPED and a reduction of 50% of the tech budget. Again, just a reminder, that's a rolling 4 or 5-year upgrade, so $45,000 didn't appear to be a big hit.
And the OPED, they're doing very well with
Very
on
well.
OPED. And I recall that in their presentation, they highlighted that and said they were considering anyway, maybe cutting back a little on
Yep.
their OPED contribution because they're so far ahead of their peer groups. Yeah.
Yep.
And so those are two very appropriate places to strike the balance. So I'm very glad we were able to get to that place. So that's good. Any other comments about RSD and school budgets, or can we move on? Hearing none. So the next item that we're going to talk about is the ATM warrant. And Don is going to be making a presentation in a minute about some possible, Anthony and Don will be presenting about some possible FinCom-sponsored articles. On the ATM warrant list, what we've seen is a very rough summary of where they are. No actual language on the specific warrant articles yet because they're being reviewed by council and drafted. My own thought is that there's really not a lot for us to do until we see the actual language of the articles. And we should not panic when we see that there are 39 articles with FinCom's name next to it.
I can't be panicked.
I do have a comment when you're ready.
Go ahead. Carlin, you have a comment?
Oh, yeah. Okay, so I'm looking at the two-pager, and we do have the titles. There are 4 non-finance committee articles that I want us to be aware of and to look at when we
Because
can
we don't have
actually...
enough, we're tracking.
Well, when we
39.
can actually see the wording, to see if they will impact free cash, if they will promote commercial development, or if they have some other financial direct contact with the town, the budget. And those are number 48, the accessory retail and industrial zoning bylaw amendment. Number 49, the zoning bylaw amendment for commercial parking. Number 51, the citizen petition regarding the continuing care retirement community. That's building the 200-unit development across from Newbury Court. And the last one is the citizen petition to protect the Orchard House from storm runoff. I don't know what those say, but if they say, well, we use free cash to do blank, we need to be aware of that when they're calculating how much free cash we want to have in this particular annual town meeting cycle. So those are the 4 that are not finance committee. I think all the other finance committee, yeah, we got to talk about it at some point.
Yeah, and I have confidence in this group that we will all read them and we will all be looking for things that aren't already on our list.
Thank you.
So, I mean, we always end up with a lot of things on the Finance Committee list that are in the nature of housekeeping, that are not really heavy lift items. But there's a lot that we are going to have the responsibility for holding hearings on and tracking. So we have a busy couple months ahead of us. But I do think there's not a lot of point in our spending much time on it now until we're dealing with reality rather than just one-line titles, so.
Oh, and then one other thing I found out, my understanding is we'll see the text of these warrant articles after the town council has had a chance to review them, which would be March 4th. So sometime after March 4th, the full text is supposed to be posted online as well as made available. So we'll be able to see it after March 4th.
So it's going to be an agenda item. We're
next
going to
meeting.
spend a lot of time on this in our next meeting. So, moving along, I'm going to ask Anthony to speak. He raised some concepts about possible items that he'd like FinCom to sponsor. And Anthony, if you could give us a little more detail on that.
Let me just find that. Hold on. Yeah, so there was 3 articles or 4 articles that I mentioned on the agenda. 3, actually all 4 would be kind of a new concept. One would be actually putting some funds, Colin, just, one of the things when we talk about reserves and 5%, all right, one thing to take into consideration when I talk about now funding the general stabilization and creating a capital stabilization and creating a debt stabilization, those all contribute to that, what we really want to have reserved too. Because creating those articles would, one of the things, if you remember, Moody's talked about in our last borrowing is our, cautioned us on the reserves. And your general stabilization fund has $4,000, and I think Dawn did some benchmarking compared to other communities, and it's in your slide deck here, which we can go through. We're really, 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 really low. That's not really good. So I think, one of the things that I had really hoped for this year, but we have so much to do, but to really come up with those financial policies, which would really, really define how free cash is divvied up. And I think that would serve the town well, and it would put the town in a better situation. With the creation of a debt stabilization, you need two buildings, right? You toured the Public Works and you toured the Public Safety, and both buildings are in pretty poor shape. And at some point in time, we're gonna have to replace those. And that's a lot more money for the taxpayers. And if we start the planning process now, we're creating a debt stabilization, and just say that if it's determined that the Peabody School got sold, that sale of that building goes into a debt stabilization. So that will help offset the cost of those buildings and really to the taxpayers. So, Eric put some slides together. I'm happy to, unless, Dawn, were you gonna go through the slides?
Actually, what I was gonna suggest is, since this ties directly into what Don's been working on.
Yeah.
Why don't we let Don
Switch
go
to Don,
walk
sure.
through those slides? Because I did, when we were talking about this before the meeting, I was hearing an echo of what you and Kerry had been saying about the need to establish these kinds of safety nets for us for a whole bunch of reasons. So why doesn't Don present what he's done, and then we can all talk about it as a group.
Thank you. I would say that in my time on the FinCom, I've always, we come to votes, should we allocate free cash? Everything sounds like a really good idea, but I never really, in the back of my mind, I'm wondering how much free cash should we have? So I decided, and I remembered that, as Anthony mentioned, that Moody's had commented that we don't have much reserves. So I thought, let's begin by looking at other AAA-rated towns in Massachusetts around us and see what they have for reserves, and that'll be kind of a benchmark beginning point. I layered on to that thinking, well, we get about $6.4 million from the state as a town. And if the state, there should be a recession, or there should be, any reduction in federal funds to a blue state, then perhaps that won't be forthcoming. So would it be wise if we have at least enough money to anticipate a rainy day that we can see coming? So what I'm suggesting is that we create some sort of a target for free cash and stabilization funds based on benchmarking with other towns. And if you'll turn to the next slide, this is one potential way to look at it. This is a look at free cash and stabilization funds plus the excess levy capacity, because since that's also in the bank, so to speak, as a percentage of the levy limit for each town. And you can see, I picked the list. There are AAA-rated towns that are near us, and certainly we could look at others. But the two that are shown in red had debt override votes last year. And those are the only two that are lower than us. Everybody else on this is higher. The median by this metric of free cash plus stabilization plus excess levy capacity, the median is 15% of the levy limit. And the mean is 20, which is kind of skewed by Lincoln and Bedford. It's kind of interesting, as I went back also to see the percentage of the levy limit that's left over, those that are closer to the levy limit have higher reserves. Those who have bigger levy limit headroom have lower reserves. Concord used to have headway. We don't so much anymore. Anthony, would you go to the first slide in the addendum? No, the other way. I'm sorry. I put in a couple of other data points. That one, it is just looking free cash and stabilization. And funds, and you can see that we're between Acton and Belmont on that list. Again, those two towns that had to go to the voters for an override. And in that case, without looking at that headway, 3% or 4% to the levy limit, we're about 6% below the median. Could be that this data is from 2023. This is off of a state finance, Department of Revenue website, is where I've pulled the data. So we could argue, or we could actually get into this and find, well, it isn't 8%, it's 9%, or something like that. But I looked at this and said, gee, I don't think we're comfortable. I'm not comfortable. And so I thought as a committee, we could have that conversation in the abstract to say, do we want to have a target? And if so, what level makes us comfortable? What is it used for? So what would we need it for? And then back on that first slide, Anthony, I was suggesting that we target kind of a total, one more back. So at the bottom of that slide, you see that maybe one way to cut this, if we agree that we should have a target, is to say, well, maybe the free cash plus stabilization plus excess levy should be at 15%, which would put us in the mean of the communities. And we could further slice that by saying, let's not go below 7.5% for the free cash. Once we're above that, we move it into the stabilization funds. And once those are all at 15, then we reduce taxes. That way we don't grow, as you see there, some towns have grown to have $30–40 million in reserves, which is the taxpayers' money, right? Now they're earning interest on it. It's a wonderful thing, but there's some level of sanity. I think the point I wanted to make here is that I'm not comfortable with our current level relative to the obligations we may face. And I think we want to come to, think about it individually or together, so that when we do face a vote for allocation of free cash, we have some benchmark to relate that to. Okay. Any comment?
I've got nine.
Okay, Carly?
Observation. All right, now, this looks to me like you're proposing, Don, is that we start with a free cash at 7.5%. That's the starting point. By my calculations, if we have $9.5 million of free cash, and our expenses are $140 million, that's 6.8%. So right now, we are below your 7.5% free cash, if I'm understanding how the calculation works. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, we could either do it based on total spending, which one way to do it, and I'd probably have a lower number then, or based on the levy limit, which is, I just chose to use the levy limit, which is $120 million as the benchmark. So it is right at that 7.5% at the moment.
That's $9.5 million.
And it's a percent of the prior year budget, right? Which is, I think, the current, okay, so.
If it's easier
Lower
to
than
do it in
140,
terms of the
right?
budget, we can do that.
Yeah, that's 7.9.
Anthony,
Somewhere down, okay.
what's best practice here? What have you seen in other towns?
So what I'd like to do is, I'd actually like to have Department of Revenue would come in and help us create better financial policies, including how to spend free cash or recommended. So in order to do that, it's something that I would have to go to the select board and ask them to approve that project. And then once the select board approved that, Department of Revenue would come in and help us to come up with best practice policies. That's what I'd like to see us do. In the meantime, I still think it'd be good to create these and throw something in these funds for this year. But, I'd definitely like to go through the process with them and have DLS come and give us some best practices.
Anthony, could you imagine getting that done between now and the completion of the Finance Committee report? No. So maybe that should be a next year's goal.
Yes, I agree. It would be a next year goal. It's not something for this, so,
Okay.
yeah.
So are we saying that we can't do anything about this year except discuss it?
I think we can discuss it and then come perhaps to a consensus on what we think is the minimum comfortable level of cash.
And I'd want to see the other asks of the warrant articles who are asking for free cash as part of this whole big calculation, with the idea that we've got a good need for stabilization accounts, but how much to put into the stabilization accounts depends on, to me, what's in the warrant articles as well.
I see it a little bit in reverse.
Okay.
Because there's always a lot of hands out for free cash. there's always a line out the door of worthy causes, good projects, things that have constituencies that are appropriately supportive. So I think, you can you can add to your savings by seeing how much money you have left after you're spending every month, or you can take a chunk of money and put it aside and then manage your spending. And I think it's a more effective way to build wealth, to start by putting the money aside and then managing your expenses based on how you've defined your revenue. So I'm not saying we should be unaware of the projects that are looking for free cash, but I think we should start from the other direction.
Okay, I really do think we need to see all the numbers. One I'm concerned about is MCI Concord. I've heard that the select board has been asking to have some free cash set aside. I think the number was $200,000, but I don't really know.
250.
Oh, now it's $250,000? Is an estimate to come from free cash, and that's one of the number of data points. I like to see all the data points and then make our decision. That's my recommendation.
Okay. You had something to say, T?
Well, I have a question. Do we have to go to town meeting to authorize the stabilization?
To create a capital
Yeah,
and
we
debt
have to do that.
stabilization, yes.
So we can do that this year, whether we have any money to put in it or not. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so it would be to our advantage to have that at town meeting.
Yeah, and to establish it as a principle.
Agreed.
Even if,
And hopefully after some analysis, and depending on what free cash comes in, I would come with a proposal and for something to go in there. And just getting back to a point that you made about $30-40 million, that's being a lot of money. Again, best practices, and think of it as your own finances, is to have 3 months' worth of money
Operating
in the bank to
expenses,
pay
yeah.
your bills. So divide our budget by 12 and times 3, right? It's funny because it sounds like a lot of money and it's in the bank, but I remember during COVID when all of a sudden, and I was in a smaller community then, and, we were really concerned about property taxes and the ability for people to pay their tax bills, people were getting laid off, and, I was sitting in a community that didn't have a lot of money in a stabilization fund, and it's a concern. So when, something like CARES money came, I took all that money and put it into just for cash flow purposes, because I didn't know what was gonna happen back then in that community. So really, it's not, it's a lot of money, but you never know when, we never thought a pandemic would happen, and what happened. So having money in the bank to either weather a storm is important. Free cash is great, but come June 30th, free cash is gone. So if we needed to spend, you can't spend something on free cash till it gets certified next year, So with the stabilization fund, if something happened, we just call a special town meeting and we could take the money right out for whatever purpose. So, I try to look at it as how do I handle my own finances and what do I want to be able to continue to support my house if, something bad was ever to happen.
Just another technical question. Can you have more than one stabilization fund?
You have as many as you want.
Okay, but when you go and have approval from town meeting to open a stabilization fund, is it stabilization funds? Or do you have to go every time to open up a new one?
It's, you do it the first time
Yeah.
to create it, and then when you withdraw, you would need 2/3 vote. So that's the difference between using free cash is a simple majority, whereas a stabilization takes a 2/3 vote. Even taking money out of that middle school is going to require a 2/3 vote at town meeting, which I can't assume somebody wouldn't want to lower your tax bill, but.
was there someone online who had a comment? No. Anybody?
No, there's no hands raised.
Anybody online? Okay. So what are next steps from this?
Well, I think that I would like it if this committee would adopt a target together that we think is the correct percentage of our budget to hold in cash, and whether it's in free cash or in stabilization funds. And that we keep that in mind then when we see requests. So are we above or below that target? And with that, and when we're creating that target, we, again, I'll repeat myself, we think about what's coming down the pike or could come down the pike. It's part of our our job to think about these things, and that the town may have a year or two without state aid. What would that do? And we don't even have enough headway in our levy limit to make up that aid. We don't want to be in a situation where we have to close a school or something crazy like that. So just having that buffer would make a lot of sense, I think.
Don, we also need to select the denominator of your equation, because you're
Yes.
using 120 million, I'm using 140 million, and the difference is
Yes.
reflected with that.
So you're
Thank
right.
you.
First step, if we're going to do this, is to decide, should it be a percentage of the budget or a percentage of the levy limit? I can go with either
Well,
one.
that's my question for Anthony and Carrie. What do other towns do? What is the appropriate denominator for us to be thinking about?
Towns, a lot of towns do different things. I don't know, Kev, if there's
report
standard,
uses
you know, is it the
Sorry, I was attending to a text message.
Yes.
Did you, the appropriate level of reserves, is that what you're
Yeah, that's
asking
what we're talking
about?
about. And
So-
how what base we apply the percentage against, if we're talking about setting a percentage as a target.
Yeah, so historically, we have looked at the prior year budget, but we have taken out the exempt debt service, right? And that's the calculation that we've made. And the AAA-rated communities, 10%, that 10% is a standard for stabilization funds and free cash. And some communities use, they use different things. Concord has typically held its money in free cash. And I think it's because it's easier to access. It takes just a simple majority vote versus the stabilization fund. And we've set up the stabilization funds when there's a specific project. From a rating agency perspective, it doesn't matter where it is. It's all part of reserves. One thing that, since I have the microphone, I just wanted to point out to you, and it's just something to keep in mind as you're thinking policy. So if you look at some of those other communities that have high level of reserves, it's important to also look at how they are funding their long-term liabilities, because Concord is I was speaking at a finance boot camp earlier today, and I said Concord is OPEB and pension crazy, right? We have very high funding levels. So our unfunded liabilities are very, very low. Our pension liability is nearly fully funded. Our OPEB liability, I know you said the school's at 60%. We're at about 67%. So both the town and CCRSD doing very well. And it's just something to keep in mind, because some of these communities that have really high levels of reserve, and obviously, we can't use our pension money or our OPEB money if there's a downturn in revenues. But it's something to keep in mind when you're benchmarking, that it's just an important factor. And so I just thought I would throw
Yeah, that's
that
very
out to
helpful.
you.
Yeah, it's very helpful.
It's nuanced.
So I still have my question. Next steps.
Peggy had her hand up.
Oh, Peggy has her hand up? I'm sorry, Peggy. You have a yellow hand against a yellow wall, so it's hard to see.
Sorry about that. Yeah, just to remind everyone, like 20 years ago, the free cash target was about 10%, and I'm pretty sure that was on not the levy limit, but the expenses.
Okay.
And Tony's right. I mean, we have pretty simplified, and Carrie, a pretty simplified approach. It's all in free cash. And that's when the FinCom at that time put in the town meeting rule that you had to identify where your funding would be coming from. So, anyway, that's all. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm
that's
kind of
interesting.
in favor of that and keeping it simple and, just not, or being very selective in how we vote on town meeting articles that request free cash.
So we're at the appropriate moment for the Public Works articles to be presented. We promised them 8 o'clock, and I'd like to stick with that. But I don't want to leave this until we know what we're doing next. I don't have a feeling that this is something that we can be making motions on and taking votes on now. There are too many moving parts. is this something we should carry forward to the agenda for our next meeting?
I think so.
And do some work on in between, so that
Agreed.
there may be more of a detailed proposal with some of these perfectly appropriate questions, like what basis are we using, and, what are other towns doing in relation to how they handle their stabilization funds, could be answered. So I'm going to take this as an action item to be on the agenda for the next meeting, and ask Don and Anthony to work together to cook this a little bit more and come back with something concrete that you can present.
Eric's nodding too.
Okay. Eric, did you want to say something? Is that okay with you?
I agree with that. I think it makes sense. And that addresses Colin's point, which I think is a good one. By then, we'll know what's in the warrant articles. We'll be able to see the text and the dollar amounts. And, I don't think we're ready to vote tonight, so I think a little bit more time makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so,
Is there, I have a question along that line, though. Is there a deadline that we have to, if we want to open a stabilization fund, and we have to go to town meeting to do it, do we have a deadline?
Warrant article's already been submitted, so it's
already
it's
done.
one of.
we have a
yes.
placeholder.
Submitted, okay.
And does the
Okay.
placeholder say $1 million for the, what?
We didn't even put
What's-
numbers in right now, it's just,
But you do have a warrant article
Yes.
for it, okay.
Okay.
Two of them. One is the debt plus the capital, the other is the general stabilization fund. So there are two warrant articles. Got it.
Okay.
Right. Okay, so this is going to be on the next agenda. Thank you. Hopefully for us to really consider and vote on. So I'm going to close out this item, and I'm going to ask, I see Public Works, so I'm going to ask you guys to come forward and introduce yourselves, even though we all know you, and,
which one are you doing first?
and move ahead.
Roads.
Okay.
You can do the roads first, then Stillwater.
Yeah, Sven Weber, Chair of Public Works Commission, and
Alan Cathcart, Director of Public Works.
so we're talking today about a sneak preview on two of the articles. One is the road and safety program, and the other one is the stormwater budget. And we understand we have 20 minutes. So I will take the presentation on the roads and safety side, and Alan will take the stormwater. Public Works personnel and staff did a great job in the last 2 years, really to try to understand what is going on with our roads, sidewalks, and safety situations here in town, and try to figure out what's the best way over a 10-year period to address some of the issues we observed. This chart here shows you on the left side is where we are today. We have about 45% of the roads in poor conditions, and then a little bit more in very poor and failing. Our backlog is $21 million. Our PCI is 73. The backlog is the identified need to repair streets, and this right now is only talking about streets. If we make the assumption we continue business as usual, which is about a $2.5 million budget per year for the next 10 years, we spend about $25 million in 10 years. The result in 2035 will be actually that the backlog is growing from 21 million to $37 million. So this is a liability for the town. And we have a remaining 38% of roads in a failing condition. So the task we from a Public Works Commission sent over to Ellen was to say, is there a better way, a smarter way to spend taxpayer money? And can you go to the next slide? I think it's important. It's coming? Okay. Here, this gives you a view is where are our current roads. The good thing is so we have around 107 miles of roads. So the percentage calculation can do easily. You see how many miles of roads. We have a certain percentage there's no repair needed. The problematic part at the moment is the purple part. This sits at a point where there's a significant repair needed, but if we don't do it fast enough, this purple bulk there is moving very, very quickly downwards. And if you go to the next slide, you can see what that means. So we have right now 45% of the streets sitting in this poor condition. And we have a cost profile, if you see there, where we say if we spend like $1 up there, then, but we wait like 2 to 5 years, and the roads go down to the lower level over there, it suddenly costs us $6 to $8 to repair. So there's not a lot of time in knowing that there are 45% of the streets sitting exactly in that spot where within 2 to 5 years they're moving downwards. And if we project this same slide here to 10 years from now on the business as usual scenario, can you go to the next? This is the picture if we do it like we did it in the last years. $25 million a year, $25 million over 10 years spent. We will have 38% of the streets in the most expensive repair classification. So next slide. We look at different scenarios. What this means is when we accelerate spending. The red down there is the business as usual. What that means with respect to where we are in road quality. So you can see if you do business as usual, our PCI index will shrink down to below 70. If we are accelerating, there are different scenarios I will touch on in a later chart. Is you can see we can improve this. The most important part in this is on the right side is what is the run rate cost. So after we invested, what is the annual run rate to maintain the roads? That's a very important factor to say, is there a way also to reduce the annual run rate by investing faster? Can you go to the next slide? This gives us the backlog, so the unfunded liability more or less. Again, the red is our business as usual. And the other charts are the different options with accelerated spending. The best way to go through this is unfortunately quite a eye chart. Can you go to the next one? So this is kind of a way to try to look at the 10 years. The first 5 years was accelerated spending, and then after that a more normalized spending to what we are used to, or potentially even less than what we are used to. We bolded here amounts that are over and above our usual level, so that could qualify in how we think about it in Tier 2 and Tier 3 levels. I think the 3 lines to look here really is the last 3 lines, is the remaining run rate in fiscal year 25. So where is the ongoing maintenance of these streets, the 10-year total spent money, and the remaining backlog after we did that. So the left one is our current budget. That is what you saw before. And then we look at different scenarios. And if you look at the next slide, we just earmark more or less what we believe from looking at that table is an Goldilocks scenario in terms of how fast we can deploy the money and what the outcome could be. And you see down there in this kind of, if we spend it very quickly, $7.5 million for 3 years, we actually can reduce down there the backlog to $3.7 million. We only have $1 million per year maintenance in the last year. The total spending over 10 years is $33.5 million. The same amount of total spending as the other scenario, but that assumes is that Alan and his team doesn't have the complete capacity to really deploy that money that quickly. Yeah? We have to think about what is really possible here. But still, we can bring down the backlog to $9 million and have a run rate of $1.5 million. I think this is very, very important. And it also gives kind of a scenario view as what can we potentially do as a town. And I personally always look at the backlog as a liability to the town. It's literally what we have to see here. Going to the next slide. So if you do the math here, and that is okay, if I add up the 10-year total plus the backlog and compare the different scenarios, you see it's like business as usual, the total spending plus liabilities 62 million versus 42 and 37. So you can postulate that there is a kind of a efficiency advantage of accelerating our spending of between 19 to 25 million, and in the same time reducing our run rate maintenance and repair costs by 40 to 60%. So that's more or less the scenario we are right now working on with the article for our roads program, but we are not stopping there. So when we touch the roads, we most likely have to touch other things like the sidewalks, pedestrian safety. It doesn't make sense from an efficiency perspective to just do the road and then shortly after go back and do the sidewalk, or look at what do you do with pedestrian crossings, how do you make things safer. So the most efficient way to deal here is, in the end, is to look in connection what needs to be done there. Can you go to the next slide? So we have this amount of 59 miles of public sidewalks we have in different conditions. Similar exercise, go next slide, is where are we? So the SCI, the sidewalk index. But you can see is we need to spend $1 million per year to reduce the backlog of $5.7 million of repair we have on sidewalks. If you go to the next slide, we are not planning for any additional sidewalks. This is just for how do we address and how do we repair the existing sidewalks, how do we combine that with investment in safety. No additional sidewalks. That leads to a combined table. Can you go to the next one? Which we try to simplify because at the moment the dimensions can be quite complex. To say it's only on a 5-year plan, a pavement investment of 25 million, pedestrian and bike safety investments, no new sidewalks. What's the total spending and what we believe can be done in Tier 3 capital? That's a high-level summary. Again, the two red ones are two scenarios similar to what we identified on the pavement side. So that gives us a total 5-year budget of $30 to $31 million, of which about 26.5 to 28 million would be in Tier 3. Next slide. Just a summary. Beside the financial efficiencies we are achieving also quite operational efficiencies. Means is if we can plan, we have a multi-year authorization for this, we can plan and be more efficient in getting the contracts done, getting the work planned. At the moment we always have to wait for town meeting to get authorization, and then we have to kind of get all of this done before the winter hits. When we have a multi-year authorization, we can plan multi-year. We can get efficiencies in our contracts. We can book people and contractors ahead of time and not fight for getting it squeezed between July and November. That's very, very important. So that's the road side and the safety side. Again, this is together. You have to think it's like good roads, good sidewalks, and good pedestrian crossings and other safety things is something you have to see as a package and not as a silo. And with that,
Just one addition other than the finance is basically all of these improvements are safety improvements. Whether you're on the road, cycling on the edge, you want it in good condition. If you're on the sidewalk, even cycling to your middle school or elementary school, if it's in bad condition, it's unsafe. So we're really trying to restore things. We hear a lot of interest in, well, it's not just the pavement, and it really isn't, but it improves everything. And the fact that we will have monies authorized through town meeting also make us eligible for grants and funding opportunities that do come up almost last minute through the state. We have funds, we'll release it, but you need to it's a matching grant or something. we'll have pre-identified projects. We'll be able to sort of leverage our funds with state funds. That's something we haven't been able to do in the past very effectively.
Okay, I have a question.
Yeah, Carlin and then Lindsay.
Okay. 2 years ago, in our finance report, we had a chart that said a $1 million warrant article equals, for the median residential household, $159 in property taxes. I suspect we'll have a similar chart this year. What's the dollar amount of the warrant article that you're going to be proposing?
Right now, the draft is 27.5.
Thank you.
On tier 3, and you're doing the math and what it means for the average household. In a peak financing, again, it's like in the beginning, you're not drawing all at once, so you have a peak effect and then a rolling down. But even if you look, it's like at a efficiency here of 19 to over $20 million, even the interest rate effect doesn't really make it that much of a difference in how better and efficient, more efficient this will be for the taxpayer. Because we have to look to the backlog as an unfunded liability. Yeah, I think, unfortunately, we are not showing that. So in the past, it was for the town always very easy to kick the can down the road on the infrastructure. And these costs, as you saw,
Lindsay, you had a...
So I have 2 questions. Should I ask only one right now?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
One or both, should I ask?
You can ask both.
Okay. So my first question is about the relationship of these estimates and how much the Stormwater Enterprise Fund is factored in here. Because I remember when we talked about setting up that fund last year, we said that this would help improve the conditions of the roads because we would be managing our stormwater better and it would maintain the road quality better. So is that factored in here at all?
I would say no. With the models that were used, and we're working with engineers, and this sort of concept is something that's been practiced in Bedford, Lexington, a couple of neighboring communities. There isn't a stormwater component. However, anecdotally, yes, if you can improve stormwater management, really it's, stormwater compromises the integrity where it's already compromised. Where you have cracks, that's where, the stormwater, rainfall can enter. And that's where condition of the road really will help, sustain that.
So, okay.
And second, you had a second
question. And then a second question. So I live on a dead-end street where, 8 or 9 years ago, there was, or 10 years ago, right before we moved in, they repaved the road. Then a year after we moved in, a water main broke on one end of the road, and then it broke on the other end. They had to replace the whole water main. It was almost 100 years old, it turns out, on our street. And so then they had to repave most of the road, and it had just been paved like a year earlier. So I'm wondering how much we're planning, how much we are planning ahead and maybe replacing things like gas lines, water lines that are under these roads so that we don't have to have these costs, have additional preventable costs come in, in the future because we didn't take those things into account.
Sure. I will assure you that I've been working in public works for almost 30 years. We always factor these things in. It's just, it's a bit of a probability game. So Silver Hill Road, we're replacing water main right now, knowing that it needed to be replaced ahead of planned road restoration. So we do it where we can. It doesn't mean we're going to be perfect, but we do, Public Works Engineering reaches out to the municipal light plant, to National Grid, where water sewer is within Public Works. So we do try and plan these, and kind of having a 5-year plan for the roads is somewhat driven by understanding and anticipating infrastructure below ground as well.
So should we anticipate big expenses on those other infrastructure things in advance of some of these investments?
Something to be aware of, and it's a difficult concept. The life cycle for a road, new road, 20, maybe 25 years. The life cycle for a water main, 75 to 150 years, depending on. So you can always miss a cycle or two, and sometimes you may have a patch repair. It's unusual to go back and redo an entire length. If you have to do a spot repair, that's sort of a modest imperfection. It's not usually a complete replacement and restoration of the road again.
Okay.
I'm going to go to Eric and then take more questions in the room. So Eric, are you unmuted?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can.
Well, I just want to say good presentation, but I think what's missing and what's really critical is providing some history and some context as to why this has apparently become such an emergent situation. You described it as an unfunded liability, and I don't understand why it has been unfunded. I think most taxpayers assume that when they write that check, the money is going to the stuff it's supposed to be going to. The firefighters are going to be able to respond to emergencies. The police are going to be able to catch bad guys. And yes, the DPW is going to be able to maintain the roads, keep the roads paved. But it sounds like that hasn't been happening. And I think it's critical to understand why. And that's, we don't have the time to get into that tonight, but when we get to the public hearing and we get to town meeting, it's going to be critical.
Yeah, so very good question, and I asked myself this, and a very, very short answer to this. I went back to the budget books of the last 10 years and looked more or less what happens. And the first time Public Works started to ring the alarm bells is back in 2016, where they said is if we continue with this funding, this will happen. So this is 9 years ago. Yeah, so it's not the first time Public Works rings the alarm bell. This is more going back to the guidance Public Works got, what the town got, and the final decisions in town meeting, what it means. And as I said before, again, I moved here like 4.5 years ago. This predates me, but if I just do archaeology here, I would say it was an easy decision to kick the can down the road because the town doesn't show a unfunded liability on a balance sheet on roads.
So I'm going to note the time, and we still have to go on to the Stormwater Enterprise Fund update. Are there timely questions now? Okay, then Don, and then let's move to the Stormwater presentation, and then we can have more questions.
I'm building on Lindsay's comment, my observation, and I'm going to try to make it a question instead of an observation. But what percentage of the problems with our roads are really caused by a utility having opened it up and now the road's deteriorated? Our road was paved 25 years ago, our street. It would be perfect, except the light plant trenched the whole thing, and now there's this dip because it was a terrible job putting it back. So my prediction is if we do this, we're going to be in the same spot because those roads will fail for the same reason. We'll trench, we won't put it back right or do as they would in Europe and tell the person, do the whole side of the street, not a little piece. To me, that's what we need to work on, is how we actually go into the street afterward. So my question to you is, what percentage of this is because of we're just not doing the digging and putting it back together again correctly?
I'll take the question, go back to our engineering group. I don't have a number for that, but I hear the question. And I think what's also important to understand is the model that we're following is something we've seen in neighboring communities. It's fairly innovative. It's a different approach of front-loading your investments, and that's the model that we're seeing success. And they have the same kind of infrastructure, underground utilities, that sort of thing. So if you go to Lexington, you go to Bedford, you'll actually see this program in place, and they're investing less money per year because they've gotten to the condition that they need to maintain and sustain.
With all due respect, if we don't put it back better after we're throwing good money after bad.
Sure, and that's part of, the engineering division's need and desire to make sure that repairs are done and even, retrenching is done. We work closely with National Grid. We've been challenged, year after year after year to sort of manage them. But even in-house, we have a lot of infrastructure. It's old, and it's all factored in.
Thanks.
All right, so let's go on to the Stormwater Enterprise Fund update.
Okay, we'll try to make this a little bit more, briefer. It's a little less significant as far as the economics go, but we do want to, it's kind of interesting, Don, you talk about sort of rainy day funds. This is exactly that, literally and figuratively. So if you go to the next slide, just a primer. What is stormwater? It is the rainfall, snow melt things that sort of wash over our landscape. And the more dense our landscape is, the more concentrated our communities are, the more impact we have on that runoff. So there is increasing regulatory requirements that we're looking at to sort of maintain and improve impacts on the environment. But we also have to be mindful of, we talk about resiliency and climate, and that is a very real challenge for communities across the country. You can see the development of stormwater enterprises. It's actually a fairly relatively new concept. I think the West Coast sort of took a lead on this. I know in the Northwest especially. But we're looking at a lot of communities adopting these utilities because, in essence, they function very much like the drinking water and even wastewater. In fact, in a lot of communities, wastewater and stormwater are actually combined. That is not the case in Concord. There are about 22 communities in Massachusetts who have been in the process of adopting these stormwater utilities in the last few years. Where we are, this is not a new concept for Concord. It's been identified in some of our long-range plan needs, our vulnerability assessment reports. Last year, you may recall, we went to town meeting with all the same sort of preparation to establish this fund. We, working with our consultant, Weston & Sampson, who's done this in other communities, determined that we would do sort of a slow and steady approach to establishing this fund. So we established the mechanism. We had a bylaw associated with providing the Public Works as the authority to manage this fund. There's acknowledgement of needs for rate setting procedures. We've established a credit process to try and encourage, sort of good environmental stewardship, even on private properties. And the interest of the program was really to try and establish a fair and equitable assessment of properties across town. So unfortunately, a lot of the taxes are residential heavy, but we also have commercial as well as private entities and property owners across town who do not contribute to this infrastructure, and this supports the entire community. So last year we established the fund. We've been working with the Public Works to identify a budget. We have an annual budget of about $1 million a year. We've identified a fee structure, or a few models to consider. We have a credit policy that's been reviewed, and on that timeline you can see where we are. We're now preparing for a hearing for the fees for the stormwater utility in May, with an idea that we have a proposed budget. That's what's included in the town meeting. We're going to have a fee structure that we hope to pass before town meeting, and if the town meeting approves the budget, we now have the pieces to establish and stand up this utility, with the idea that the annual budget allowance, you can see, is, as I said, approximately $1 million. You can see the distribution. You're going to hear a lot of, we've talked about in the past, the MS4 compliance is really the regulatory requirements. They're administered through EPA. They're requiring a lot of communities to go through the same assessment of your existing stormwater system, assessment of the quality of discharge from these pipes that discharge to the rivers and streams. And you can see that we have a list of some of those non-capital related expenses that we need to address. Go to the next slide. Here are some of the proposed fee structures the Public Works Commission has considered. We're using models that have been established across the state. We're not trying to recreate a wheel. In essence, we're very sensitive to the impact on the residential properties. The way we are imagining this fee structure, for a very small residential lot with very little impervious cover. Impervious cover is the pavement or rooftops and that sort of thing where water can't just percolate in naturally into the ground. We're looking at, for a small or residential parcel, somewhere to the tune of about $41. That's per year. You know, this is not a significant assessment, and it can go up to larger residential properties. It might be $150, $200 on a, you know, sort of the high end. And so we'll be taking time to walk people through these fee structures. We're going to have a hearing, and I expect to, you know, sort of have work with a bridge, work with the League of Women Voters, so we can actually have discussions on this. So it's, you know, more than just a introduction, but more detailed conversation. Next slide. Here is the percent of impervious cover around town, and sort of this helps us drive, you know, where the needs are and where we can, you know, see what we need to mitigate. In essence, you'll see it's parking areas, paved driveways, roads and streets, the rooftops, even swimming pools need to be factored into this. Next slide. With the credit policy, we are trying to encourage best practices on private property. It's fairly, a lot of residents want to do the right thing environmentally, so we want to help educate and give them tools that they may adopt. The real opportunities for people to benefit from credits are the larger commercial complexes where they may have to do more significant investments, including capital investments. And if they do, we want to make sure we can provide some credit for that or some incentive for them to do the right thing on their campus.
What is it, BMP?
A best management practice, I'm sorry, yes. And that's sort of standard of the industry of, it could be rain gardens or porous pavement and things like that. We are looking to have a default to senior low-income discount also included, like we have in some of our other utilities. Next slide, Anthony.
Can I hold you on that particular
Sure.
one?
Yeah.
It's called a senior and low income. I think about 20% of the town is over the age of 60. That's a lot of seniors.
It's more than that, it's 30.
Maybe more than that.
Well,
What do you mean by senior
Well,
discount
it's the
versus
same
low-income
criteria that
discount?
we've used with some of the other utilities. I will clarify that in the slide
Okay,
moving
thank you.
forward.
Appreciate
Yes.
that.
Along
You
the
have to be
same
both
lines.
those, right? Yeah.
It's
the-
and.
Senior and low
Well,
income.
I want them to define
On
it.
the, on the previous one, the previous slide, I think I understood you to say that commercial does not get charged?
No, they will get charged,
in-
but we want to incentivize them to do more than what they need to do
Okay.
regulatorily.
Okay, so if it's a commercial area, it's also the paving and,
All that impervious cover.
okay.
Right.
Can I just volunteer one information? Is if you look, it's about 51% of the impervious area is in residential and 49% in non-residential. So given this will be the split
Okay,
between residential and non-residential, also
Right.
on the fee side, so that
On the fee side,
that
okay.
49% of the fee structure will be funded by non-resident lots.
Good,
Yeah.
thank you.
Next slide, Anthony. I think this is just the wrap-up for questions, so.
Okay, this is an update, and we have lost whatever we gained at the beginning of the meeting, and we still have to talk about the report. So with that caveat, does anybody have any questions?
Will we be able to ask questions later, like other meetings?
No, I think they're done. So if you have any questions about them, about this presentation, about CPW, ask it now, John.
All right, so when you talk about staffing needs, et cetera, are there going to be duplicates with Public Works? So, you know, you need a new truck, but you have one at Public Works, or are you guys looking to have economies of scale?
At this point, it's the first year we're looking at staffing that's going to take care of and address some of the administrative functions, you know, standing up and setting up billing, customer accounts, that sort of work. I think we have an allowance for third-party consultant technical support because we still won't have that in-house. We're going to need that. Ultimately, there is going to be additional allowance for, say, another operator who's going to be doing some of the more enhanced work we need to do out in for the maintenance, for the inspections. We have both catch basins that need to be maintained regularly and cleaned, and then we have the stormwater system, the pipes that we really need to investigate and do a lot of work in cleaning of that as well, much like we do with the sewer system. So there is an allowance for additional staffing, but they'll be complementing existing staffing.
And is the expectation that this will be self-funding?
Ultimately, that's the goal, yes.
How ultimately?
Well, it's going to be, we're in an early phase of this, standing up a new utility. We've done it successfully with water, with wastewater. We're sort of following the model that we've seen nationwide and across the Commonwealth. So the real challenge we have is what are the regulatory drivers? And what we do know is that all communities are being asked to do more. And, we just don't know where they're going, but that may drive, our ability to say it's, self-sufficient.
Okay, thank you. Don, go ahead.
If there was ample room in our levy limit and our taxation, would you be doing this, or is this a way to raise money for a needed function outside of the guideline budget?
Well, I'm trying to, so if there would be ample money in the general fund, is that, yeah. Well, then it's more a strategic decision in a certain way for the town is where the burden of that is. Is it on 93% of the residential property paying for something that is generated by like 49% problem from non-residential parts? So that's more kind of a, so far the experience from my view on this is that that line item was chronically underfunded, and you can ask again why. Mm-hmm. I don't know why. So far the town had only reacted to disaster scenarios when it failed and had to divert money from free cash or from the road program, or when ARPA was there to get some ARPA money for it, but that's over. So we somehow the things got done, but that also led to taking it from somewhere. Yeah.
So why don't we create an enterprise fund for the roads and sidewalks? And the
well, first of all,
And why don't we not revisit a town meeting vote?
yeah, that's what I was going.
Established
So we are not here to
fund.
decide if there's a enterprise fund or not. The decision is how much the enterprise fund is funded.
Exactly. And so in deference to the time and the fact that we still have one or two big items on the agenda, Lindsay, do you have a quick
A
question?
question about the budget, or the
Oh, right.
$1 million budget. Is that something we should think of? So I understand the climate is that more regulation is coming, right? But if that was constant, should we expect the budget to be higher at the beginning because we're kind of just getting going and you got to investigate all these catchment areas and do a lot of stuff the first few years? And should we expect this budget to be steady to down, or like if the regulatory environment was steady? Or is it higher now because we're just getting started?
I would have to say the regulatory environment has never lessened the
Okay.
demands. And in fact, I even know the state is statewide trying to deal with looking at resiliency in a whole new way. So I would not anticipate it will drop down. This is going to stand up a system. And I would go back to the roads program. A lot of times we do the roads and we find, unfortunately, in the 11th hour, there's some underlying stormwater challenges. That's a utility or infrastructure that we don't have a good handle, and that can really compromise the condition of the road as well unless it's, addressed up front. So this would allow us to be a little bit more proactive on that.
So my question to you is, what percent of the work that you're going to be doing, Alan, for stormwater is going to be blended in with what's going to be happening with the $27 million project?
The good news is the engineering division will be responsible for both, so I think they will be able to focus on where are we spending, where the core of the roads are, what's the stormwater system, what can we actually do in advance.
Do you know the stormwater system versus the other?
Yeah, we have we have an inventory.
Okay.
We understand what's there. We don't know completely the condition of what's there.
Right, and you're gonna be running into that as your, yeah, okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
if those are all our questions, thank you. That was very interesting.
Thank you for the opportunity, and we will be getting the message out in other venues where there'll be, opportunities for discussion. So.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gentlemen.
So promptly at 8:20, we're moving on to the Finance Committee report. Carlin will note that that was sarcasm.
Duly noted. All right.
Duly noted. So I'm going to actually ask Don and Carlin to walk us through the work they've been doing to get us prepared for the to actually do the Finance Committee report and to talk about some of the different approaches that they're looking at from prior years. So Don and Carlin, you may.
Well, so what I'd like to accomplish tonight is to look at the outline together. And I think per Eric's commentary last meeting, ask for volunteers to take on various sections of the report. But I also wanted to share a few ideas about how we can make this a little more digestible and informative. And in part, I've been looking at other towns to see what do they have, what do they do. So I included just two things here in the packet on slide. I'd like to start with that slide 120 of our tonight's packet is from Acton. And this is one page of their report. Anthony, are you able to share that on the screen?
It's like the second to last page of the.
Yeah,
Second or third
page.
last.
Well, what they
Yeah, that's-
have done here, which I found to be I thought was really interesting, is look at spending on a per capita level for the town. So they can benchmark against other towns and expenditure per capita. And this, John, is what builds on your comment earlier. And the slide that I've included here is from the fiscal year 21 budget, and their chosen subset of towns. Concord was the outlier as the highest expenditures per capita at over $6,000. I've done some work with that list of the AAA rated towns, and we're less of an outlier against that group of towns. But that said, does everyone agree this is an interesting way to look at things, look at the expenditure per person? And this data is readily available, I'm happy to say, from the Mass Department of Revenue. They have a database that's easily accessed. And it goes down to showing you how many dollars per citizen are spent on on education, how many on public works, how many on general government. All of these things, John, to your earlier questions, they're here, and we can pull that data pretty easily. One thing I noted, and I wish Sven and Alan were still here, but our spending per person on public works has gone down since 21.
Just wait.
Oh, you are here, Sven. Yeah, we're down quite a bit since 21, and although our spending level now isn't out of line, it's about $100 lower than some of our peers. And again, I think it's our debt service. Again, that's clearly laid out in this report. We're spending about $400 more per person on debt service than the average town. So I want to pull the data and get this out into the. So does first question for you, is there any feedback on this notion of using the per capita metric when we're comparing with other towns?
So
I
from
find
this
it-
page, you just really want to focus on that first one?
Yeah.
Peggy, did you want to say something?
Yes, I did. I really think if we are going to use this, you need to block out annual operational expenses versus debt. Concord Carlisle got some substantial benefit from state funding, but Acton Boxborough has gotten much, much more. And if our debt from the middle school is included in this, then we will never, never be catching up to those lower numbers. So I would suggest you separate operational and debt.
I couldn't agree more, Peggy. And in fact, I was thinking of doing it with spending subject to guidelines versus the spending that isn't. So that would capture the debt plus the insurance. And does that make sense? Or just pull out debt is enough, maybe?
I don't know. You need to think about whether or not you can actually
Fines
compare.
are such a local issue. I would just keep it more simple than that.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm with Peggy.
Okay.
I agree with that. I think what we define as being subject to guidelines might be very different from what another town does. Even this year, there were things that had been subject to guidelines that we pulled out that
Yeah.
gave the schools the ability to meet our guidelines by pulling out sped. So, or was it out of district?
Out of district.
Out of district.
Just
So
call it debt.
I don't think that we can make that comparison work, but I think a simpler comparison of operating versus debt could work. I totally with Peggy on this. I like the idea of presenting the information this way.
Okay.
I think we need to give some careful thought to what we want to highlight on the first page or two, because that's all
Yep.
some people will read.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah,
Dee?
I was just going to ask or suggest that I like this. Would this be something that we could create separate from the report you're going to be doing that would be available for people at town meeting so that they could
As a
see it?
handout?
Huh?
As a
Like a
handout?
handout?
Yes, and to both of your questions, the
Yeah.
next thing that I've attached here is the executive summary that's produced by the city of Cambridge for their report. So they try to, and I'm suggesting that we insert this right after the introduction. So we have a brief intro from the chair, and then we have an executive summary with the most pertinent metrics, which would be the question, what should go in here? But if you scroll down to slide 121, and I guess it goes to 122, the last slide, you see that Cambridge has chosen to look at the increase in the tax bill, and there are these metrics that are most important to them. But the notion of an executive summary would
That's presented
exactly fit with
graphically,
what
not
you're
just
saying,
narratively.
and graphically as well as paragraphs.
But I would have that also as a separate handout at
I-
town meeting.
Just
Some people will
to
never
continue
read-
on that subject, I think the first slide where you're comparing to other towns is less relevant. I mean, we've been behind Acton for 40 years, and all these things, and the average single tax bill, is it median? What's the real estate valuation? I mean, our schools have created incredible valuation for our citizens. Your second slide, which you pulled, it looks like from the city of Cambridge.
Yes.
I love that one. I think that, and especially, it pulls out residential, commercial, industrial, so we get the picture. And I think that one is, because it's just about our own town, not compared to, the usual suspects, is much more relevant to our citizens.
I think that's a good point.
So those are my comments. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I think there may be a place in the report for the town comparison, but maybe embedded more deeply.
Right.
Yeah, in Cambridge's report, you'll see it as the last table in that two-page comparison with
Yeah.
other towns. And a very clear, easy to read, it's not a chart, it's just a table.
Lindsay, you had
Yeah,
something?
but the author selects the towns.
Yes,
Okay.
That's right.
So they pick Newton, Brookline, Somerville, Watertown. I mean, you're picking, and I feel like the same thing on the first slide. You're picking slides, I don't know, that may or may not just present a certain case. I think the middle slide doesn't present, it's not subjective to which other towns you have selected to make the case.
Peggy, I'm not suggesting that we copy this at all. I'm just saying this idea of a two-page executive summary that presents the most pertinent information to us, and we try, in that notion that I mentioned last time of simplifying the data so that it's easier for folks to digest it.
Absolutely, and I love it, and I think that second slide is fabulous.
Great.
I think that your work on this is very impressive.
Go with Lindsay first, then me.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
Yeah, I love the idea of this executive summary, and I think this is probably a pretty good template to almost start with. One thing I was wondering if we could incorporate that I'm not seeing here is kind of like what are some things that we look at to evaluate the health of the town finances, and how are we doing on those? Like the free cash you talked about, the levy limit, just some metrics that we care about to indicate the health of the town finances. Might be helpful.
Absolutely. I think that's spot on.
Yeah, I agree with that.
For the mechanics of it, and this is for Anthony, are we going to be allowed to have a separate handout from the booklet that we put in? Don't say sure, because the mechanics of what happens is if we have a separate handout, town moderator is probably going to require 700 to 800 copies of that document to be presented at town meeting. Is the town moderator going to allow us to have a separate handout from what's incorporated into the unified booklet?
Well, I certainly can't speak for the moderator, but I saw last year there was handouts, and I would think that she would consider that.
Carlin, if there's new information, she'll allow it.
Hold on one second. Mary, did you have something to say?
Because Mary Hartman, 16 Concord Green. Carmen's been to the select board to talk about it. This year, we're publishing something called a briefing book, and we're hoping to get as much as we can in that briefing book. She will allow handouts, but she's not encouraging them.
What's a briefing book?
So would this go in the briefing book, our executive
Yes,
summary?
our
Okay.
entire
Yes.
report is going to be a section of the full briefing book. I
okay.
think maybe we've
Right,
jumped ahead and
right.
haven't briefed the whole.
Got it.
We were
So
informed.
the briefing book will include all the handouts.
Yes.
Well, the briefing
Well-
book will include all the reports, the warrant, the materials that used to come separately. And our finance committee report is no longer going to be a freestanding document.
Yes.
It's going to be part of the briefing book. And I think the answer on the handouts, Dee, is probably no.
It might be.
Let me
I
fin-
didn't
let
know
me-
about
let me
this other,
finish.
yeah.
I think it's going to be no if all it does is reproduce a couple of pages of our report.
Well, I'm not even suggesting that. I'm thinking of an executive summary or an executive document would be different from what we would have in our report.
What Don is proposing is
Is
including the
having it.
executive
Okay.
summary as
All right.
part of the report.
Okay.
And I think that we won't be able to just hand out 2 pages of our report
Yep.
separately. We can reference them, and everyone in town will have received their copy. And if there is updated information, I'm channeling Carmen a little bit, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is what the position she takes. If there is updated information, then there will be handouts. But if it's just reinforcing what was in the report, it's in the report.
See,
So-
Eric has his hand up.
Hi, Eric. What would you like to say?
Hey, just briefly, so the finance committee report is gonna be a section of this all-in, like, annual town meeting briefing book. Nothing prevents us from doing something like a QR code or a link in our report that points the reader to supplemental information. So if we gotta get this in, it has to be, as the moderator describes it, 100% camera ready by May the 5th. So the report has to be 100% done by May the 5th. If after that, we come up with supplemental information, or if we decide we want to provide accompanying documentation, we could, one idea is a QR code or a link to material that lives on the Finance Committee website. We could do something like that. That may be a way around the logistics of a handout.
Good, okay. So I want to be cognizant of the time, and what I want to do is ask Don and Carlin what they need to take from this meeting in order to proceed to the next stages of report preparation.
Right. If we go back to slide 117, Anthony, it's a couple of pages back. It's the outline for the
FinCom
report.
report sections.
And I just want to walk through this and get, and appoint some volunteers. How about that? It begins with the chair's letter. Eric owns that, followed by an introduction. What I'm proposing is we use the executive summary in that place, and that I will, following this meeting, for next meeting, I'll have a couple of versions of what that might look like and get your feedback on what data is missing or what data that you like that's presented there. The next section from, again, last year's template was the FinCom responsibilities. I'm proposing that we move that to the back of the report, and together also with the Concord's budgeting approach, which is three below there. What I'm looking for is a volunteer, if anyone would like to participate. Pat is volunteering.
The reason why I'll do it is because that way I'll learn a lot.
Yep, very good, good idea, yep.
You
So
have no
so
idea
you'll
how
take a
much
look at that.
thinking back.
The responsibilities
Don't worry, there'll
don't
be
really
more stuff I
change.
have
So
to
Pat's
do.
going to do the
Yep. Okay.
responsibilities?
Then Eric, you volunteered for the trends and anticipated challenges. The next section is forecasted revenue and expenses. And you noted, Eric, that it will need a lot of input from you, Anthony. Now we get to the meat of it, really. And this is where Lindsay's name just is appearing over and over.
Don, hold on. Can I volunteer to work with Anthony on the forecasted revenue and expenses piece?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that would be great, because
That'd be
that will
great.
need a
Thanks.
narrative to
Yep.
frame the numbers.
Okay.
So,
Put me on for that one.
Thank you. Lindsay, the 5-year projections and the guidelines are going to be in the part of the report. And by all means, let me know how I can be of help to you as you think about that. But yeah, we have to find some way to.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth doing that, the 5-year projection of taxes again and putting it on the agenda for this meeting so we can all kind of be reviewing it together.
Great.
So,
so
yeah.
do we want that on the agenda for our next meeting?
I guess it would have to be the next meeting, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. Yep.
I mean, that's the single most important part of the report.
Yep.
For the town.
Yep.
So, next meeting is
No
that-
pressure.
Yeah, so we.
Go ahead,
we can
Lindsay,
find some
you're
time.
on.
So I'll
Yeah.
work with Anthony.
Is there 2 meetings in April? I have
Well,
to
so
get
the
the
next
budget
one's
book
in
out,
March.
so
Two, but
The
the
next
one
one's in
person
March.
that's got a ton of,
Our next meeting's March 20th.
And
March
then,
20,
So
April 10
what,
is the
then what do
hearing.
we have, when?
then we have about 3 meetings in April.
Yeah.
Oh, so could we do it by
Yeah.
like one of the April
Yes.
meetings?
Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
that would be
24th.
better.
That would
I'm
be
really
better.
tied up in March.
Just we've got
Yeah,
two
most
hearings
of
on
the
10th and
most of the
15th.
April meetings are hearings.
Oh,
So we just, schedule for a 5:30 or something.
Right.
The 10th and the 15th are hearings. 24th is our regular meeting.
but
Is
then
the
we're-
24th,
but
the
that's too
24th is
close
cutting
to
it too
the-
close.
That's too close to when it's due.
Yeah, so,
No,
why don't
we need to
we,
meet
let's
meet
take
during the
this,
hearing.
let's take this offline.
Okay.
We don't have to decide the date now, we can work it out.
In April.
The action item I'm taking is that we're going to be looking at the 5-year projections at one of our April meetings.
Yep.
And that's all we need to know right now.
Okay.
And I would say that the 5-year projections are definitely going to end up in that executive summary.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right,
yeah,
that's
okay,
right.
okay. So, Carlin, you would work with Anthony on the budget highlights, is that right? Did I get that right?
I was
From
going to do the
forecasted revenue and
forecasted revenue.
Forecasted revenue and
expenses.
expenses. Okay. So would anyone want to volunteer to work on the budget highlights, sort of pulling out relevant facts?
Yeah, I'll do it.
Excellent, Lois, thank you. The conclusions, I don't know, let's move off of that for a minute, down to FinCom recommendations. Now, this one we can't write until we have the hearings. And we have,
In my experience, you can write a lot of it.
We can get started as soon as we see the
You
warrant
can actually
article
write a lot of
description.
it.
yeah,
So,
Article says, well, our conclusions are.
I'll be happy to write that. I know that kind of lingo and,
Well-
it's sort of like, it's almost like minutes.
Peggy, if you want to take responsibility for that, it's managing a table, and then there'll be sub-responsibilities, because you'll be able to reach out if there's a warrant article that relates to Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust that I'm liaison for, you would get me to write that paragraph for you. So,
Oh, I see, okay.
okay, but if you want to be the
I was
coordinator.
thinking it
of
would
that-
just be the articles that we discussed at our meetings.
No,
No.
no, it is a summary of all of the recommendations that the Finance Committee is making for every article with respect to which it is making a recommendation, unless you're going to do it differently this year.
It could be 43 recommendations at max.
Right.
Could be fewer.
Right, but I would take it off of the, our meetings when we vote those articles.
Well, that you do that, but what we've done, and I don't know if Don's going to do it differently, but I think Dee did
Okay.
this last year, is we have the article, the recommendations FinCom is making for action or no action, or deferred action to town meeting, and then we always write a little explanation
Yes.
of why we took that action.
So my hope
Okay.
would be, now that we have a single book for citizens to refer to during the
Yeah.
meeting, is that our recommendations can be interleaved with the warrant articles in that book. So that you'll see the warrant article, and then below it, there'll be a FinCom recommends yes or no.
I defer to you
Okay.
and coordinating with the other parts of the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah, I
however
mean,
you wanna handle it.
I was thinking of it would be like a table insert, almost like what we're looking at today, only more significant.
Yeah.
Just the table.
I know we've always done a table because it was a separate document, but if it's one document, I think more people will see what we have to say if we put it in with the article, that's all.
Okay, well, I'm willing to work on it, and I'm happy to have a partner, and we'll decide later.
We really didn't have any kind of
Great,
explanation.
thanks. Okay, the last thing is just, there's a table at the very end of FinCom. These are something that Pat's going to get intimately familiar with, because we have a charge, we have FinCom responsibilities, and it includes some items that need to be in the FinCom report. And Anthony, we're certainly going to need your help to find these numbers. These are in our charter from 1960s, and I think they're pretty self-explanatory. You gave me this week the table of town debt, and I'll simplify that to be an exhibit as well.
So I was focused on that one a little bit. The table of town debt, does that, it's like our excluded debt, especially by year, like what is the payment per year? Not the debt, but, well, I guess it's the debt, but that's a table that shows how much debt we have outstanding per issue, bond issue. And
Is that something
what the
that-
debt, outstanding debt on that is for each year. So that's how we get the pylon diagram. And I'll be
Yes.
happy to help with that. We just need to get that debt.
Yeah, I actually have it already, Peggy, and the table,
Okay,
the
okay.
table is massive. There is,
Yeah.
but the pylon graph is, is one good way to look at it. That's the payments. And Anthony, this debt, I was going to ask you, but it looks like it includes all but the last issuance for the middle school? Because it looks like about 80 million for the middle school.
I'd have to
There were
check
two
that.
bond issues.
Just one thing with the debt, Don, maybe I can show you offline, if Peggy wants to join, that's fine, but the budget book we're using, ClearGov, has all the debt charts built in there.
Okay.
So it's by issuance.
Okay.
And then it'll create these various different graphs, and you can select
Great.
how you want to do it. So maybe if I showed you that, it might be
Yeah,
something.
that'd be
that
great.
both
Thanks.
would-
Yeah. Thank you.
So let's-
Okay. that's
Answers
it.
the
I
question.
want to bring
Perfect.
this to a close.
Thank you.
But I want to make sure that you guys are getting whatever you need. Yeah, John, did you have a comment?
Are we going to address the impact of warrant articles on real estate taxes?
Yes.
Yes. But that's part, it's going to be
Uh,
summarized.
Thank you.
Executive
for saying
summary.
that. Yeah, yeah. I think we need to do, we have to do that.
Right.
Right.
How many?
It's in the second one.
How many
It's in-
warrant articles
it's in
are
introductions,
asking
right at
for
the
free
front.
cash?
In the introduction.
If you,
I'm
I
sorry?
don't know, we don't have that information, do we?
The note says recast as an executive summary model on Cambridge at tax impact of warrant articles.
No,
No,
she was
okay.
asking the number.
How many?
We
I don't know.
We need to filter through the warrant articles and see which one of them, or any, ask for free cash. I mean,
Peggy, we need to see the warrant articles, and they don't exist yet.
exactly.
So.
I cannot believe we haven't seen those yet.
I'm going to now ask if there's anything else we need to do other than summarize. And Eric, do you want to talk about possibly rescheduling the next meeting?
I think that's what it is, yeah.
Yes, just briefly, because I know it's super late. Next meeting per our schedule is March the 20th, but I'm aware that
that's
some of
all right,
us,
I'll let you
including
know.
myself, have a conflict on that date. So I don't want to try to hash it out now, because I don't think we'll be able to get there, but I'd like to propose moving it back to Thursday, March the 27th, or moving it up to Thursday, March the 13th. I will, in our recap email, I will invite folks to let me know their preference, and we'll try to find a date that works for as many members as possible.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is recap the action items I took. So anybody, if I forgot anything, tell me. And then I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn. Okay.
So moved.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
Second.
So
Aye.
the first action item I took was that that Eric and Carlin are going to review Miguel's emails, identify those points that he's raising that are within the purview of the Finance Committee, and identify other places, other people within town government and town structure, select board, the town government, where his other inquiries should be referred. So that was the first action item I took. We were going to locate and circulate a chart that shows what the planning has been for dispersing the middle school stabilization funds. So we can all get some grounding in that and think about what number is the right number for this year. And we're going to work on, this is primarily on Don, working with Anthony to come back to us at our next meeting to talk about adopting a target for setting up stabilization funds.
You mean a financial target,
Yeah.
Right,
a cash target.
exactly.
Okay.
And then we're also going to think about when we're going to be scheduling a presentation on the 5-year tax projections for a meeting sometime in April. And Don is going to work on a draft template for our executive summary that will include the information that we want, as opposed to, it'll be based off the Cambridge one, but using the information that's critical for us. And those are the action items I took. Did I forget anything?
I love the idea of the executive summary.
Oh, yeah, it's a great idea. Just a great idea. Okay, so that'll all be circulated to you guys along with questions about the date of the next meeting. Now,
So moved.
Dee, John, would you like to second the motion to adjourn?
Sure, second.
All right. All in favor, we're adjourned.
Aye.
Thank you.
Aye.
Good night.
Good night.